By the end of this video, you will learn about the top 10 worst places to be in the United States during a total power grid collapse. Grab your popcorn and maybe a flashlight, because if the lights go out for good, you're going to want to know which states to avoid like the plague. Spoiler alert, your dream vacation spot might just be your worst nightmare. Alaska's isolation presents significant survival challenges during a total power grid collapse. With vast expanses and minimal infrastructure, emergency services and community support are scarce. The state's severe cold, with temperatures plunging to 50 degrees or lower, can freeze fuel lines, disable mechanical devices, and make hypothermia a real risk. Alaska's wildlife, including bears and wolves, adds another layer of danger, especially as food becomes scarce. Transportation is heavily reliant on aviation, with many areas accessible only by small aircraft or boats. In a grid collapse, this crucial lifeline would be cut off, leaving residents stranded and without essential supplies. The rugged individualism that characterizes Alaska's spirit would be tested to its limits as self-reliance becomes a survival necessity. While many residents embrace a subsistence lifestyle, the disruption of supply chains would severely challenge their ability to sustain themselves. Nevada's status as the driest state in the U.S. poses severe water scarcity issues during a grid collapse. Las Vegas relies almost entirely on the Colorado River for its water supply, and without electricity, water treatment and pumping systems would grind to a halt. This would turn a chronic water crisis into an acute emergency overnight. The extreme heat in Nevada, with summer temperatures often exceeding 100 degrees Celsius, would become deadly without cooling systems. Urban areas, particularly Las Vegas and Reno, would face catastrophic infrastructure failures. The state's dependence on imported food and goods would lead to shortages and potential unrest as communities scramble for limited resources. Nevada's vast, sparsely populated landscape would make access to help difficult, and the disruption of supply chains would further complicate survival efforts. In such a scenario, isolation becomes a significant barrier to survival, compounding the challenges faced by residents. Florida's combination of extreme heat, humidity, and frequent hurricanes makes it a particularly challenging place to survive without power. The state's average summer temperatures hover around 90 degrees Celsius with humidity levels that can reach 90%, making it feel much hotter. Heat stroke and dehydration become serious threats without the ability to cool down. Florida faces regular hurricanes, with a major hurricane hitting every 2.5 years on average. The power of these storms can cause widespread destruction and long-term power outages. Flooding is another critical issue, with much of the state near or below sea level. In a grid collapse, water treatment plants could fail, leading to unsafe drinking water and stagnant floodwaters becoming breeding grounds for disease. Florida's dense population would exacerbate resource competition and sanitation issues, potentially leading to social unrest. Surviving in Florida during a grid collapse would be extremely difficult due to these combined factors. California faces significant challenges during a total power grid collapse, primarily due to its water scarcity issues and frequent wildfires. The state relies heavily on electricity to transport water from the north and the Colorado River. Without power, millions could be left without water, exacerbating an already critical situation. Wildfires, which are frequent and devastating in California, would become uncontrollable without power for firefighting efforts. The state's economy, heavily reliant on electricity, would face catastrophic disruption, affecting industries from tech to agriculture. California's densely populated urban areas would struggle with resource scarcity and potential social unrest. The state's infrastructure, designed to support a continuous influx of visitors and residents, would face immediate and severe challenges in a grid collapse. The disruption of supply chains would lead to shortages of essential goods, further complicating survival efforts. New York, particularly New York City, would be a nightmare during a total power grid collapse. The city's dense population and reliance on complex infrastructure make it highly vulnerable. Without power, subways would halt, elevators would trap residents, and essential services would fail. The extreme weather, from scorching summers to freezing winters, would pose serious health risks. The disruption of supply chains would lead to food and water shortages, and the economic impact on Wall Street would have global repercussions. New York's densely packed population could lead to heightened competition for resources and potential unrest. The state's complex and interconnected systems essential for daily life would become significant liabilities in a grid collapse. The inability to maintain basic services and infrastructure would make survival extremely challenging for millions of residents. Texas faces extreme heat and frequent droughts, making it a difficult place to survive without power. Summers regularly see temperatures above 100 degrees, and without air conditioning, the risk of heat strokes and serious health issues rises significantly. Water scarcity would become a crisis as pumping and treatment systems fail. Texas's vast and remote areas would make accessing help difficult, and the state's economy, heavily dependent on energy production, would face severe disruption. The 2021 freeze, which left millions without power, highlighted the state's vulnerability to grid failures. The combination of extreme weather, vast distances, and economic disruption would make survival extremely challenging in Texas during a grid collapse. Mississippi's extreme heat, frequent tornadoes, and fragile water infrastructure make it a challenging place to survive during a grid collapse. The state's average summer temperatures soar into the high 90s, and humidity levels can be oppressive. Without power, air conditioning, and fans, heat becomes a killer. Mississippi sits in Tornado Alley and faces frequent hurricanes, both of which would be devastating without power for early warnings and emergency services. The state's water infrastructure is already in poor condition, and a grid collapse would exacerbate sanitation issues and increase the risk of disease. The economic impact would be severe, with agriculture and manufacturing coming to a halt. Mississippi's rural isolation would make accessing help difficult, and the state's economic instability would hamper recovery efforts. Louisiana, known for its hurricanes and low-lying geography, is highly vulnerable to a grid collapse. Without power, flooding would become uncontrollable, leading to serious health risks and property damage. The state's extreme heat and humidity would be unbearable without air conditioning, posing significant health risks. Louisiana's fragile power grid, already tested by frequent storms, would fail to support recovery efforts. The state's economy, dependent on oil and tourism, would face severe disruption, leading to job losses and economic instability. Louisiana's unique geography, with much of the state at or below sea level, makes it particularly susceptible to the compounded effects of a grid collapse. Rhode Island's compact size and high population density would exacerbate resource competition during a grid collapse. The state's economic fragility, with slow job growth and a declining population, would hamper recovery efforts. Rhode Island's financial buffer, sufficient for only about a month, would be inadequate for a prolonged crisis. The disruption of essential services and communications would make it difficult to maintain water supplies and basic sanitation. The dense population would intensify competition for scarce resources, leading to potential unrest. Rhode Island's economic and infrastructural weaknesses would make it a challenging place to survive a prolonged grid collapse. West Virginia's economic and infrastructural challenges make it a difficult place to survive a grid collapse. The state's slow job growth and high foreclosure rates indicate economic fragility. Without power, essential services would halt, leading to water and food shortages. The state's vast rural areas would make accessing help difficult, and the sluggish economy would struggle to recover from extensive damages. West Virginia's financial stability, while relatively stable, would be insufficient to counteract the broad economic vulnerabilities. The state's reliance on agriculture and manufacturing would further complicate recovery efforts in the event of a total power grid collapse. And there you have it, the top 10 places to avoid like the plague when the grid goes down. Hopefully, you're not watching this from one of these states. If you are, well, you might want to start packing. Stay safe, stay prepared, and don't forget to stock up on those non-perishables. Thanks for watching, and may your Wi-Fi never fail you. Until it does.